13-0, 7-0 in the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev remains perfect and beats the former welterweight champion of the world, Kamaru Usman, via majority decision. Bit of a weird one on how we got there on the scorecards, but let's talk about the fight. Let's talk about what is next for the welterweights, now turned potentially permanent middleweights. Round one started in this fight, and I was like, oh boy, Khamzat Chimaev is really about to ragdoll Kamaru Usman. Literally the conversation I had on Friday that I didn't know if I could visualize it happening. It looked like he was en route to do it for however this fight was going to go. It was a clear 10-8 across the board. All three judges scored it at 10-8 for Khamzat Chimaev. He dominated Kamaru in round one with big-time takedowns, huge control time, huge ground and pound submission threats. He did everything in round one. And it was like, wow, this guy is that guy. You know what I mean? Like, regardless of the short notice, this is still a former champion here in Usman, who, if anything, at 185 is at least going to feel a little bit less depleted from not, cutting down to 170 like he's been doing for so many years. But this isn't the narrative that happened. Rounds 2 and 3 turn out to be so much closer. This is the scorecard here. I have to pull this up. Kamaru Usman on Derek Clearly's scorecard wins round 2, and Khamzat wins round 3. Then you go to David Letheby's scorecard. He had 2 and 3 both to Kamaru Usman. And then Vito, don't want to butcher that last name, but Vito. I think Vito's Pizza is a place I've had before. That sounds yummy. Anyways, he gave round 2 to Chimaev, round 3 to Usman. So outside of round 1, these judges' scorecards are all over the place. I think it does paint a good picture of just how competitive rounds 2 and 3 were. I feel like both could have gone either way. I do feel like round 3, I felt personally that it was stronger for Kamaru. I felt like that was easier to give Kamaru in a less kind of a less of a good, obvious winning round for Khamzat, if you will. It took me a couple of seconds there. My brain shorted out, but I got there, right? Round 2 was much closer and much more competitive and closer to score. So I wouldn't have been surprised, I guess, if this would have just been a draw, because a 10-8 clearly in round 1 for Khamzat, and then 2-3 both go to Usman, and I understand a draw, but it couldn't have been a winning result for Kamaru Usman, I think, is my best way to kind of put the words out here, just because of how dominant round 1 would have been. So a draw was the worst case scenario in this fight, and because we couldn't have gotten a Kamaru win, and then obviously we end up getting Khamzat winning by majority decision. So it was a very good fight. It went the distance, and I had a hard time kind of like with this fight. How is it really going to play out? Again, we haven't seen Usman ever really get taken down by anyone. I think Anik pointed out on the card that he had like a 97% takedown defense going in. I think at the end of this, he ended up defending 7 out of 10 or maybe 8 out of 11, something like that with the final stats. So he did a great job, all things considered. But dude, Khamzat is just, when he wanted to pursue and really push for it, he was able to get them. Other than that, they were relatively lackluster. They weren't set up as good. He chose to strike a lot more than maybe he should have here with Kamaru. It was kind of giving me the Gilbert Burns vibes again, where he was choosing to take the harder path to victory for whatever reason. I do not know. He did say in round 1 he felt he broke his hand, so maybe that played a factor for sure. He told Dana he was trying to get a finish and couldn't. But I feel like as fans, we made out here with a pretty great fight. And, Kamaru said he would love to co-main under Strickland Chimaev and fight DDP Dricus du Plessis. So he seems to be committed to just finishing out his career at 185. Dana said he would allow him to do whichever that he chooses to do, which obviously, I mean, you have a guy that's been such a great champion and defended the belt so many times. At this point in his career, he kind of can do whatever he wants. How does this picture play out here? Dana said the winner of this fight was going to get Strickland. Khamzat was the winner. It seems pretty clear that that is the fight that's going to be made next, assuming his hand injury isn't too awful bad and sidelines him for too long. I would imagine they try and get Khamzat on UFC 300. A lot of people think that like Conor's a shoe-in for UFC 300. No. When you have Conor McGregor, you don't need him to be on a UFC 300, a UFC 200. He doesn't need to be on these big milestone cards because regardless of who's on the undercard, Conor could be fighting a trash can and it would do a million pay-per-view buys. So why would you waste Conor on UFC 300, a card you're going to want to stack with 2 or 3 title fights and other big names sprinkled in throughout, when you could have a Conor pay-per-view, say it's 299 or 301, whatever the case, right? It's going to do a million, and then sandwich it in between, have UFC 300, an event that will probably approach 1 million buys even without a Conor because they will load it up so well. At least one would imagine. It's going to do great regardless of pay-per-view numbers. I don't know how things do anymore with pay-per-view since it's ESPN Plus and stuff. You get my point. I'm rambling. So I think, and Noah and I had talked about this off recording, it seems like a very intelligent thing to do, the UFC, to have Khamzat Chimaev headline a card like UFC 300. And you have Sean Strickland coming off of a victory against Israel Adesanya, boosted his stardom and his name power so much with that victory. That's a massive main event for such a big card like UFC 300 would obviously be. And I think it makes a lot of sense that that would be the headliner there. And I'd love to see what else would go underneath of it. But I think I'm 75% confident that UFC 300 will be headlined by Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev. I think that will be the main event. At worst, a co-main if they try to like maybe turn John Jones around. He's fighting next month. There's only so many other ones like and then the heavyweights, right? Or sorry, light heavyweights, Yuri and Alex. Like, I don't know. I think I'm 75%, like I said, sure that Strickland Chimaev will headline UFC 300 with some big fights and other title fights underneath. And maybe one of those fights could include Usman and Dricus du Plessis. It kind of does stink for Dricus that he has been pushed to the wayside after finishing Robert Whittaker. But, I mean, come on. You know, he turned down that fight with Izzy in September in Australia. And I know he had injuries and whatnot, if you will. I don't know how serious they were, but he obviously chose not to pursue that fight with Izzy. I'm sure he wants to be 100%. But in result of doing that, he has been kind of set aside right now. He's been an afterthought, if you will. Dana put the label on Chimaev versus Usman as a number one contender fight. Chimaev is a much bigger name and star right now than Dricus is. Pair him and Strickland, it's going to do big numbers across social media, the press conferences, media days, all that stuff will be huge. The UFC will do that. I don't know if Dricus wants to wait out because you know how that goes sometimes with the UFC. So if he's going to turn down a title fight and then wait out his turn to get a title fight that he had turned down originally, don't think those are two good things to combine for Dricus's future. But if he were to accept a fight with Usman on the undercard of that, in the meantime, and if Dricus could beat Kamaru Usman, I mean, that is massive, massive stuff. So I think Dricus could face Usman, maybe face Izzy. I know Adesanya came out some point last week and said he wants to take a very long layoff because he's been so active. So maybe he doesn't get in there with DDP, which is fine. I think a good alternative option is Usman versus Dricus. I think that is super intriguing. You add the grappling factors in here. You add the striking of Usman with the crazy striking and power of Dricus and that dog that Dricus has in him. I think that would be an incredible fight. So I love both of those. I think it seems very clear from me as a fan what I would like to see. Khamzat Strickland, Dricus versus Kamaru Usman. Maybe some people would disagree. You know, Usman shouldn't just get thrown in with a guy that's literally ranked higher than what Khamzat was here. Like, should Kamaru really get the number 2 ranked middleweight in the world after losing to Usman? Maybe he shouldn't off of merit, right? But when you've accomplished what he's accomplished, you have the name that he has, and Kamaru Usman, he could very well get that fight. So we'll kind of see. They had came out and said that Strickland was offered to defend his title straight up against Khamzat. He declined to come in on short notice, which, I mean, obviously that's understandable. Jared Cannonier was then offered to face Khamzat. He got injured, couldn't do it. That's how he landed on Kamaru. So I don't know what it looks like for Jared Cannonier and things right now because he had a great last performance. So there's a lot of moving pieces at middleweight. It's kind of nice that this fight happened at 185 because in all of the men's divisions, I felt like as of lately, the past couple years, middleweight was a little stale. I mean, we had a great longtime champion in Izzy, but there was something about the rest of the division that just wasn't as fun. There wasn't as much to look forward to as a lot of these other divisions. But now I think there is. You know, you add Khamzat into the mix, you add a welterweight champion, Kamaru Usman, into the mix, and I think it shakes things up a lot. I think there's some freshness added to the division, and I think it was much needed. So let me know what you guys thought of this fight. Did it go differently than what you expected? Did you think Hamzat could come in and, start or run through Usman? Did you think Usman could get a big time finish and halt the hype of Hamzat? Do you feel that this type of performance and win hinders Hamzat's stardom any at all? I don't personally think it does. I think, if anything, this type of fight just raises it because it was just such a weird way to get to fight week, which is the same thing as last year in September. So let me know what you guys think about this one, how we got here, and how you feel about these two and the middleweight division moving forward. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new so you never miss recaps, previews, breaking news, everything in between in the MMA game, because we know that it just keeps on churning day after day, month after month, year after year. And I'll see you in the next one.